Okay, so we'll be recording this. I just turned record on, and this presentation will be posted on the AMA Higher Ed SIG YouTube page. You can also, hi Tam, you could also watch our past presentations. Those are also on our YouTube page. And I've put up the link for if you'd like to join the AMA Higher Ed SIG, and our newsletter just came out. And we have lots of great events coming up with the AMA conferences. Okay, and let me share my screen because it's 11 o'clock. And thank you all for coming. Just a few housekeeping tips that if you wouldn't mind turning off your mics. So ideally keep your mics off till the question and answer period, and your camera on if possible, or at least at the end when we take a picture. And I'm still admitting people. I posted in the chat the link to join the Higher Ed SIG. And please, if you could keep your camera on and your mic off, that would be great. And we've got 26 slides to go in 30 minutes, so let's get started. And what I'd like to do with this presentation is to briefly talk about some of the things I learned from being an editor of Journal of Consumer Behavior for 6 years. And I'm currently at Gulf Coast University. Here's our agenda. If you're thinking, gee, why is it getting so much harder to get into journals? It's not just you, it's happening to all of us. So we'll talk a little bit using an example of JCB, of why that is. Then we'll talk a little bit about, based on my experiences, my recommendations with research and doing a manuscript. Then we'll finish up with talking about the review process. So it is harder to get past the journal admin desk as well as the editor desk. And part of it is there's getting to be so many more submissions. And the reason for that is that universities all over the world are now increasing the pressure to publish and to publish in higher level journals. So if you're thinking, is it just me? No, it's not just you. So they're playing a greater gatekeeping role, because something you have to think about is that once a journal gets past the editor and gets sent out to review, given the number of reviewers, the time it takes to do a review, and the number of rounds that an article can take, that basically that journal is committing 40 plus hours of volunteer time on the part of the reviewers. And so we're not going to ask our reviewers to give us all this time if we don't think that the paper fits or makes a contribution or is of the quality we need. Some of the things where admins might be stopping your paper is manuscript length. And so you need to really look at the author guidelines. sometimes authenticate, and authenticate is stricter than turn it in. And so if you ever wanted to check your authenticate score, there is a fee for doing so, but there's the link for that. Um, Also, more journals are getting concerned with the use of AI, and more journals are asking for pre-registered study plans and data storage, such as Open Science Framework, and I've given that website. I'm just giving JCB as an example that as we start getting more and more papers, we move to a multi-study journal. Also, our acceptance rate for the last year was approximately 5%. That we had over 2,700 submissions, which was up over 20% from the year before. And when you look at the previous year, you can see that, okay, we had 456 submissions 10 years earlier, and now we have over 2,700. So when you see how many total papers are coming in, and this is not just a JCB issue. I know Cleopatra just posted about this with Journal of Product and Brand Management. And so this is something that's happening with all the journals. Also, journals are doing more screening for AI. The one thing I would ask of all of you is do not take a paper you've been given to review and then run that through AI, because the problem with doing that is you've now taken someone else's original work, you've put it into the open AI system where they have no control over their original work anymore. And if somebody posted a question relating to a topic that they examined, it would be out there, um, you know, in the multiverse, in the AI verse. So please don't do that. I think one of the best write-ups I've seen from publishers on how to deal with AI was Elsevier, so I included that link. Some things to think about when you're looking for, your work, where to send it, is does your research address the topic? Does the theory in which you've grounded your research, have there been other articles in that journal covering that theory? Sometimes what we'll see people do is that when we look at the articles that are cited from a journal, that they're all in the future research section, but they're not really part of the full the literature of the manuscript. And so I would just ask you to find journals which organically fit given the research you're doing. Also, the idea of quality. If some journals will not take any student studies anymore. And so if you have student samples, they won't take it. Other journals won't take it if your DVs or attitudes or intentions. They want actual behaviors. So look at those author guidelines, look at the website, and so forth. And then also, every journal's looking for something that contributes to their field. So I know when I was an editor, I saw papers that were excellent papers, but they were not consumer behavior papers. So you want to make sure you're making a contribution to that particular journal. Also, you want to make sure it makes a contribution to both theory and practice. Journals that were very highly theoretical are now also looking for what does it mean for marketing managers? Also, the idea of generalizability. You don't want to say our contribution is we're looking at this one country or this one city. It needs to be generalizable beyond that. Also, what you want to do is you don't want to say, oh, we did what someone else did, but now we're doing it in a different product domain. That typically is not going to be enough of a contribution for an A-level journal. And the idea is you're going to make the case for it in that introduction. And then in the implications, you're going to go back and look at what you said was the contributions in that intro and demonstrate how you met and fulfilled those contributions. And then I know I've seen this where like a reviewer will say, oh, your paper was done well, but so what? So you've always got to think about that so what question. And again, we've talked about that. Um, Steve D'Alessandro, the current, and this is, I believe, his 10th year as co-editor of Journal of Consumer Behavior. This is what he shared as his wish list for 2026 at the ASMAC conference. Now I want to just talk a little bit about some recommendations with doing research. The key thing is you want to pick a topic. To hit an A journal, you're probably going to spend 3 to 5 years working on that paper, probably 5 to 7 for an A star. And so you want to pick a topic that's meaningful to you and interesting to you, um, because you're going to be spending a lot of time working on that paper. Also, sometimes people go, what's the hot topic? Well, by the time you develop your study, get it through IRB, collect all your data, write up your paper, submit it, go through the review process, it may no longer be a hot topic. Also, you want to work with people that you like to work with and that complement your skill set. And so if there's an area in research where you're weak in, such as positioning the paper or, some kind of analysis, but you need that kind of analysis. You want research to develop a research team to be strong when it comes to the overall paper. And you want to enjoy the people you work with because, again, you're going to be working with them not just for a month or two, you might be working with them for a couple of years. And you need to ground your research in theory and demonstrate that you're extending our understanding of that theory. Your abstract is, if we were in sales, this is your elevator pitch because this is the first thing everybody sees. And so you don't want to get bogged down into, what level of SPSS did you do or what kind of PLS. You want to get into what did you do? What did you find? Why is it meaningful? Then you want to make the case for your paper in that introduction. I would always hear Greg Marshall at the Meet the Editor sessions at conferences talking about how just saying how you meet a gap, you're addressing a gap, that's insufficient. Why do we need to address the gap? Make sure your lit review is thorough because you might write your lit review first, but then by the time you're done collecting your data and analyzing it, there may have been new articles coming out. And so you'll want to do that because there may be pieces that have come out in the last couple months that weren't covered in your lit review that you'll want to cover it. And make sure that your lit review is working, to help explain why you're hypothesizing, what you're hypothesizing. you want to follow, the best methodology practices. More journals are asking for your IRB approval. And typically, you're going to need to get IRB approval before you collect one piece of data. And so you'll need to address that. And while new techniques are great, having a new technique that in and of itself is not enough of a contribution. And the key thing is, as you're working on your paper, you need to provide enough information that somebody could replicate it. And I know you're thinking, well, how can we do that given that, the word limit? And that's where you're going to need appendices. So you provide all the details of, you know, who are your subjects? How did you get them? That you've included information, all your measures. So if somebody wanted to do exactly what you did, that they could replicate your research. In making your results, you want your results very clear that people can tell exactly what was supported, what was not supported, and the use of tables and figures can help here. One of the things that I would see as an editor would be you'd get to that discussion and the paper would be really good. And then you'd start reading that discussion and you can almost feel the exhaustion of the authors. And so what happens is people think, okay, I've got it all written up. I just got to do the discussion, just a couple more pages. And they try to do it too quickly. I would recommend, if you want to make a draft of it, fine, but then take a day or a weekend off and then go back to it to really make that discussion as strong as possible. So you're really clear on how you're contributing to theory, how you're contributing to practice, what should managers do, and that your implications don't go beyond what you actually found. So it doesn't get into, gee, a manager could do this and a manager could do that if it doesn't fit what you actually measured. And then be very clear about the limitations. There's no such thing as a perfect research project. Be upfront. If you're thinking, oh, I don't want to point out what's wrong with my paper, the reviewers will find it. And if you don't point out the limitations first and how you try to address them and what does it mean for future research, the your reviewers are going to wonder, do you know what the limitations of the paper are? Then in finalizing your paper, you want to make sure you're finalizing those style guidelines that, for example, Emerald has a very unique way of how they have people do abstracts versus other journals. So if I see an Emerald style abstract, that's basically telling me the paper was rejected at an Emerald journal before we got it. So you want to make sure you follow those style guidelines. You might want to have a colleague read it just to see can they follow everything you did. Because if they can't follow it, probably the reviewers are going to have issues also. Make sure that your tables and figures are referred to in the paper, that the numbering's correct, and that they're easy to follow. Um, I would also recommend use a professional copy editor. I've been doing research for over 30 years. I hire a professional copy editor. I pay her $250 a page, and it's the best $250 I could spend per page. Because one of the most common things we would have get from reviewers is writing styles, because you have to think about it's really a global audience, so it has to be very clear. And your reviewers are global. The last thing I would recommend is to use a cover letter if there's any potential issues, such as this is coming from your dissertation. So you're probably going to have a higher authenticate score if it came from your dissertation, because yes, you're revising it, but there's only so many ways to say things. So, if I saw a high score, I would look to see, well, did they tell me it came from a dissertation? Did you present it at a conference? So if I'm thinking, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. And then if I see, oh, well, you presented it at AMA or AMS, it's like, oh, that's where I've heard of this paper before. So those would be my suggestions. Now, let's say your paper got out to review and now you've got a major revision. In 6 years, I saw very few like mean reviewers. Um, I would say the vast, vast majority of reviewers are trying to be constructive. One of the things they may say is, we don't see the contribution. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't one. It just means you didn't communicate it well. So you've got to really revise that intro to make the case. Or you might need to do more to enhance the contribution, such as do another study. Or it might be it's not making a contribution for that journal, but it could make a contribution and fit better elsewhere. Um, Not all comments are equal. So, but don't ignore any, or don't say, well, we disagreed with the reviewers, um, because and maybe the reviewer's wrong. I'm not saying the reviewers are 100% correct, but explain it to the reviewers and, in a positive, constructive manner. Look at the comments. Will it improve the manuscript? And if you see something from more than one reviewer, that means you definitely have to fix it. Also, did the editor mention something? Or a lot of times it will be the associate editor. I've had people address reviewers' comments and then ignore the associate editor's comments. Well, the associate editor makes the recommendation to the editor. So you need to address everyone's comments. Now, sometimes you might get a rejection. If that's the case, don't just say, oh man, rejection. Let's send it exactly how is to a different journal. Because if it's on a specific topic, and that journal worked to get experts in that topic, the other journals probably reaching out to those same experts. And this happened to me personally, that we sent it to 1A journal and it was rejected. And a reviewer said, you really need to do a third study. And this is what the third study needs to do. So we did the third study, sent it to a different A journal, get the first set of reviews back. And one of the first comments was, I was so glad to see you conducted that third study like I suggested. So at first we're like, wait a minute, this is the first review. Then we realized it was the exact same reviewer from that previous journal. And so the issue is, you're probably going to get the same reviewer. I've seen it happen more than once, or I've seen reviewers go, I've seen this exact paper verbatim at another journal. They listened to nothing I said. Is it okay if I just give them the exact same comments because it's the exact identical paper? You don't want that situation happening. And So you want a strong response. You want to make it as easy as possible for those reviewers to see where the changes were made. And it's not just about stuffing the paper, it's about improving the manuscript. And if you get a minor R&R, that's great, but still treat it like a major. I've seen authors blow off a minor R&R thinking, well, it's practically in. And then they don't address, even though there are smaller comments, they're still critical. And I've seen papers go from a minor R&R to a major R&R because they ignored the reviewers. So you don't want that situation. In your letter, address every point respectfully. Include the reviewer's comments in full. Don't try to edit the reviewer's comments. Um, Specify where you fixed it or why you can't address it. And again, there may be things in that response letter that don't end up in the final paper. So if the reviewer wants you to run everything over, but with a different program, and you might feel, no, we picked the best way to run it, still run it like the reviewer wants it. It might be a footnote in the paper, but then within the response to reviewer, you have the full details of that you ran it and how you ran it and all the results, and then say we noted in a footnote, we had the same hypothesis results, but we verified it through this other method. Thank the reviewer's time because that reviewer probably spent 4 to 6 to 8 hours reviewing your manuscript. And the best way to thank them is to see that the paper truly is improved. And so just some things to keep in mind. If you make a change, it's probably going to have sort of a domino effect that's going to change multiple sections. You want to, once you've made all the changes, then go through a couple times to cut down some of the bloat or some of the repetitiveness. Make sure nothing contradicts. And if you don't understand what a reviewer is asking, email the associate editor or the editor to get clarification. And then finally, in our last few minutes, I think it's really important if you are doing research in a specified area to build a relationship with that journal. Follow them on LinkedIn, respond to their post. I would not encourage here, let's get connected on LinkedIn. And then 10 seconds later, you're DMing them with a favor. Read the article so you're familiar with what type of work they're publishing and review for the journal. And if you submit, to an editor saying, gee, I'd love to be a reviewer, be sure to include your expertise in terms of methods and topics and include your vita. I know with JCB, we keep a list and, we keep sending out that list to our ERB members of the ad hoc reviewers. I think there's a real benefit to being a reviewer. And I think particularly it's one of those service activities that truly has an impact. I know as a reviewer, when I see a paper published and it's like, yes, I played a little tiny role in that paper and making it better. So you're truly making an impact on the field. I always find it makes me a better writer because I see things that they're doing and it's like, oh, I really liked how they organized their comments to reviewers, or I really liked how they organized this. And so it gives you suggestions. You're seeing what are the latest things that are happening in your area, and there's opportunities for recognition. When you're asked to review, please respond quickly, even if the answer is no. We would much rather have a quick no than getting ghosted and we don't know, because that delays things for the authors. Make your reviews constructive and detailed. Even if you're going to recommend reject, help the author so they can improve the paper for somewhere else and be professional. Now, sometimes, like the comment, I've seen this exact same paper and they didn't listen to a word I said. Don't put that in the response to the authors, but that would be something useful for the editor to know. Um, Note your strengths and weaknesses. So if you're not, if you're an expert on the methods, but not on that particular topic, let the editor know. So that way, if the editor doesn't see a lot of feedback from you on the topic, they know it's because you focused on the methods and vice versa. Um, if you agree to review the first time, please see it through. It's so hard to lose reviewers during the process, and the authors, it drives them nuts, but sometimes it has to be done because we need it to be reviewed. And even if you're like, I just don't have time, at least look at, did they address what you asked them to do? And then in the editor section, say, I was limited on time. I focused purely on my comments. I didn't focus on what the other reviewers asked them to do. But that's, we would rather have that than nothing. So in conclusion, it is hard to publish research. Know the journal, know the literature, and I'm a big believer that good research always has a home. So if it gets rejected, don't take it personally. I know it feels very personal, but I've had papers that have been rejected. I waited a little while before I went back to the reviews, took the comments to heart, made the paper better, and I ended up publishing them in a better journal. So, and again, a rejection doesn't mean your paper's bad. It just means it may need more or may not fit. And again, you can always ask questions before you submit. Well, thank you so much for your time. Here's my email and my LinkedIn, and I'm going to stop sharing and look at the comments. Okay, so someone's asking if I'm doing, let me make the comments bigger. Okay. If I'm doing a qualitative study, is it necessary to, I would talk about what it means for theory. I still would have a theoretical. You might have, it might be more phrased as to continue to build on this theory with follow-up work, but I would still have a theoretical. The role of research philosophy as a process in marketing manuscripts. Um, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, to be honest. That I think look carefully at the journal to see if they express their research on what they're looking for, and that will help guide you. Okay. Oh, and thank you. Yes, what I'll do is I'll send out, once we're done, the slides because I know I have links. So to the email where I sent where I sent the Zoom link and at 10 o'clock, I'll send you another one. And then if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to take a picture. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind putting on your camera, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off record now. If you wouldn't mind putting on your camera. Okay.